Okay, good. Thank you. And welcome everyone to another installment in the series, the ISGAP webinar series on the intersectionality of anti-Semitism. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Judit Bokser-Liwerant about transnationalism and intersectionality in the building of the anti-Semitic tropes with a view from Latin America. Now, the series itself, the intersectionality of anti-Semitism, arose for a number of reasons. Given the global pervasiveness of anti-Semitism and its online presence and related inroads into the mainstream, there's perhaps no greater challenge for scholars of anti-Semitism now than to reconsider our assumptions about who the anti-Semites are and where and how they mobilize. This 12-part series of seminars, with 6 in the fall and 6 in the spring, interrogates the identities anti-Semites presumably possess, the ideological positions they prefer, and the places they inhabit. With an eye toward anti-Semitism's ideological fluidity, as well as its contradictions and corresponding convergences, we are interested in original, interesting, and emerging areas of anti-Semitism research. To this end, we invite researchers to present work on a range of topics. Those include, but are not exclusive to, anti-Semitism's convergence with misogyny, racism, heterosexism. We're also interested in the growing convergence between the social movements and/or corporations, including news outlets, whose legitimacy and bottom line are informed by opposition to or connection with anti-Semitism. We're interested in the insights that can be gleaned from comparisons across regions, as well as those that can be had from in-depth attention to country and/or site-specific case studies. So you see there are many points of intersectionality, as it's called. Our speaker today is a renowned scholar, accomplished, well-known. Dr. Judit Bokser-Liwerant is a professor at the Graduate School in Political and Social Sciences at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Her research interests include collective identities and public spheres, Latin American Jewish communities, globalization processes, and multiculturalism. She is the director and chief editor of the Mexican Journal of Political and Social Science. She's also the co-editor of the Brill book series on Jewish identities in a changing world since 2009. She is a member of the National Research System with a fellowship at the highest level. She's been a distinguished visiting professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and much more. So at the invitation of ISGAP, Judit recently launched the Anti-Semitism in Latin America and Comparative Perspective seminar series, where she is the convener. We were very honored to have such an esteemed scholar, and please join me to welcome Dr. Judit Bokser-Liwerant. Dr. Bokser-Liwerant.
Well, thank you very much, my dear colleague, Professor Patterson. Thank you very much. And thank you, the people of ISGAP, the director, Charles Small, and El Shaddai, and Daphne Klachman, all the people that have been behind our effort. As was just mentioned, we launched for the Latin American, or better say, Spanish-speaking countries, a series on anti-Semitism with global perspectives. And I fully agree with this idea of approaching our regional, national, specific causes with a global perspective and benefiting precisely from a view that can cross national frontiers, academic and disciplinary ones. Today, I'm going to deal with I would say, very problematic and broad horizon of questions that are both historical and conceptual. And they intersect, they come together. And I will focus on the building of the anti-Semitic tropos. That means images, representations, perceptions, metaphors of the negative Jew, and certainly its changing roles. As I will try to explain, there are convergences and divergences that characterize the changing circumstances and functions of anti-Semitism, its prejudice representation and its images. And this, as I will also try to explain during my conference, this representation are reworked during different times, in different ways, and most importantly, the social forces, the political frameworks and institutions, the technological mechanism of diffusion, the economic conditions that have periodically driven the revival of this persisting myth are not the same in the different contexts and in different times. So I will not deal with anti-Semitism, I would say the tropos, the negative images, as a cyclical eternalism or as something that is transhistorical, but I will underscore the recurrences and also the changes. Therefore, I refer to the building, to historical and conceptual building of the tropos. I will first refer to some introductory remarks, then to a very exemplary situation, which is transmission of anti-Semitism without Jews inside the binary Latin America and the West, then how it was built during the immigration processes and its function and utility, both of Jews and of the negative images. I will focus on 2-3 events or circumstances that may allow us to see how these tropos, these images, these conceptions are re-elaborated. And I will finally go to how these negative tropos has been internalized by the, I would say, theoretical currents that today are competing and debating in the academic world. So I will start first, if you allow me. I will turn to a PowerPoint and I'll come back later for the conclusions to you, but I'm all the time with you. So let me share the screen, right? And let me share with you what I prepare as a presentation for today. So here we are. Let me just close this. Let me fully open and let me be sure you all can see the screen, right? Okay. So this is, as I was presented by Professor Patterson, the main focus of my presentation. So let me start reflecting of the fundamental challenges that come when intersectionality and anti-Semitism come together. Historically, we'll see it through the development of my conference, and theoretical, we'll have 2 main moments to refer to it. Certainly, intersectionality is an analytical perspective and instrument for critically understanding the multi-dimension of the power relation. and its potentiality has shown in different fields. Certainly, when we approach gender, certain gender social movements, and when try to connect the private, the intimate, and the public, and reflect about the interconnections that are not immediately visible to us. However, its focus is always on the basis of power relations. And in this respect is both an analytical concept and a political practice. And in this global framework of intersectionality and theoretical debates, global anti-Semitism is only rarely included in the theoretical reflections. Jews are excluded, as we all know, from feminist, anti-racist social movements and also current movements of protest. This is not to be, I mean, this way. I think that we have to approach conceptual efforts to overcome this fracture, but we have to understand how it comes. First, I would say all the movements that stand against racism have great difficulty in grasping with anti-Semitism, and mainly because it is subsumed. It lost its singularity. It is subsumed, again, I repeat, in racism. That is, it's a double process of reduction, of reducing one element to the other. I mean, it is first seen only as racism, a case of, and then racism is only seen as a dichotomy of white and black, and Jews are implicitly or explicitly identified with whiteness, not only with whiteness. A problem that we'll see over our presentation, that it was not necessarily so in different stages of the social political development of Latin America. So it is really a problem because if we focus only or mainly in a binary approach that is gender, either one or two, and lately, of course, all the discussion open to other options of identity, class, the oppressed and the oppressor, and race, black and white, then it leaves out several essential dimensions that characterize Jewish history: ethnicity, ethno-national being, ethno-national diaspora, and religion. As I said, the power matrix, when later we'll see it connected with post and decolonial studies, the power matrix brings us to the whitening of the Jews and then reconversing many anti-Semite tropos, mainly of control and power, of class structure, and of its belonging to the West. And here we have a double problem to say. First, because Latin America, as you well know, is the Americas, right, is the first extension of Europe, outside the West, and then becoming the world system. So from Latin America, we do have a very ambivalent relation with the West. It is a referent to follow, but is a referent to challenge. And if the Jews appear as representative of an exploitative class, a structurally racist group because they are white. Also, Israel, we'll see, appears as a bastion of the Western imperialism and Western imperialism in the Middle East as an artificial and alien element in the midst of supposedly an homogeneous region. So this, we have to reflect on these challenges. This is the way I call it, right? How do we explain that anti-Semitism is part of other forms of social, cultural, and political exclusion, but it can be subsumed or reduced only to one of them, like racism. So let me approach how we see the building of a tropos, right? So anti-Semitism's recurrences and changes display along diverse dimensions. And as we already said, over globally interconnected realms, but they are mediated by shared regional traits, Latin America, and local singular configuration. Mexico is not Argentina, Chile is not Brazil, so we have to pay attention that we have to be very careful to avoid generalizations that are not sustained by a differentiated reality of this region and of the Americas at all. So we are going to deal, and we are already dealing, as we could see, with the first perception of how Jews are seen, with historical changing shades, shapes, meaning, and time and context are important. So the recurrences of an original, let's say, Judeophobia outlines and their shifting significance will bring us to see old expression overlapping at the meaning-making level with current new definitions of the Jew. So just to make a conclusion of this introduction, anti-Semitism, symbolic and conceptual representation, and the way they are produced and reproduced discursively pose challenges to our social research, right? And as I insist and repeat, the negative tropos of the Jew and its changing meaning, role, and functionality run across time in distinctive social, economic, political, and cultural constellations. So here what we have is just to further clarify that anti-Semitism has different levels, right? We are focusing on the negative conception, representation of the Jew, and it has a subjective dimension, stereotypes, myth, attitudes, not necessarily only individual, also social, also communal, behavioral dimensions, actions, practices, institutional arrangement, and of course, we have to follow out the metaphors that objectify these anti-Semitic imaginaries interact with world vision, ideologies, ideas that give them certain structure. I will in a minute bring it as an example, but I want to underscore what you can see on the lower part to the left. We also have to understand that we face a further goal to understand in each case what is the social organization of hate and hate speech. That means how versions of the other are communicated in society through a multiplicity of resources, narrative, that we have to cope with them. And I bring here an example, right? For example, metaphors that reflect the negative tropos, and we'll see them during our presentation, which are not always the same, but they are recovered and redefined, just as actors of world domination, the dazed people, killers of God, money lovers, money seekers, powerful, selfish, immoral, that they part, and here I underscore, of a world conspiration. The conspirative dimension, it's very important, and I'll refer to it. And here we come to another very problematic relation with our subject. They are seen as foreign, as strange, as with no root, as an exclusive caste with distinctive traces and character. And gradually, it will appear the Zionist lobby as an example of a modern way of expressing this conspiration, and Israel and Zionism are seen in the power matrix of colonialism. However, as I said, these are metaphors that are reflecting images, concepts, and usually they are related and interact with vaguely formulated integral, right, frame that include this. For example, imperialism, Zionism, colonialism, racism, they provide with such structural and ideational platform. So these bring us to several questions that I will try to quickly approach. The first one, Latin America has been always seen as a fertile a region for anti-Semitism. Today we see with this global expansion that we must avoid simplistic reductionist approaches. Now, what I want to say is that here we have, and I don't have the time to detain with detail in each of the I would say historical moments, yes, but in all of them, we see not only, but we see the way elements of anti-Semitic thought are interplaying, interacting with other political, social, philosophical, and world vision. Of course, known to everybody, the Conquest and the Inquisition and what it meant, right, for people fleeing Europe. And I must here underscore, put attention, they came here escaping, right? They were not representing the empire, right? And that's very important to make a distinction. For this, as for in the 19th, 20th century, Jews fleeing the empires of the Ottoman, the Tsarist, the Austro-Hungarian Empire to arrive to Palestine. We have to distinguish here if they are subjects that were persecuted in the empire or they were part of this imperialistic movement, right? And then I can't, but let me just underscore, right? One of the main points that I will underscore today is the conflicted relation with modernity, with Western modernity. My mentor and teacher, Professor Eisenstadt, paid a lot of attention and developed important work on the idea of multiple modernities. That means different ways of being modern in the Americas, versus the idea of authors like Whitehead that would say that Latin America is a sort of mausoleum of modernities, goal to approach and then failed, right? We have to pay attention to the Catholicism becoming a civic religion with an age that misses the role of Catholic Church vis-a-vis the tolerance of the others. The problem owes violent cultures, and we do know we have, and it's we have to see in this respect the case of Argentina, which may wonder to more than one that listens today to us, the permanent tension between fascism, peripheral fascism, and liberalism. And we come to the 21st century with populism and the discursive creation of the people, of us, they, and the existence of dissolvent democracies and the risk they carry. Finally, to synthesize this historical, probably so quick, but I didn't want to leave it out, it is about the avatars of Latin America facing Western modernity. It has to do with the dynamics of group cohesion and national belonging. If they are part of the nation, or if they are not considered as a legitimate sector of the nation. In this sense, I want to say that Jews can be seen as a signifier, either as the stranger within the national community, it is a very individualistic approach, or as a rootless cosmopolitanism, that is, he doesn't belong to any place, or he has a kind of group solidarity which challenges the nation, because we are talking about a Jewish diaspora and interconnections of communities in different parts of the world and during different times. So either they represented the atomization of the nation or alternative modes of belonging that are sub, as I said, or transnational. Of course, as I said, the case of the South of Euro-America, where immigration changed the profile of the original and native people, we have there a more rooted, a more entrenched liberal thought, willing to build the public sphere as a place of encounters, but having serious problem dealing with diaspora, the Jewish diaspora and diversity. Or the case of Indo-America, where, like Mexico, will be and has been one of the cases that I have studied, not the only one in the region, but mainly studied. Here we see the difficulty to deal with diversity to build an homogeneous national identity. In this respect, then, I will bring to you a very interesting case that will connect us both Europe, Latin America, and it also will connect us with a different sort of imagination. That is anti-Semitism without Jews. That's a very interesting example, right? Because here what we do have is that during the dictatorship of Porfirio Díaz, before the Mexican Revolution at the end of the 19th century, there was a group of the elite that was close to the president's circle, right? To the dictator, the enlightened, they were called the científicos. That means the scientific, because all the influence of positivism and the approach to development, and they were seen, well, first, they were part, what I'm going to present was part of the debates between liberals and conservative. As in Europe, because it is at the same time of the Dreyfus affair, it represented the clashes that took place between the enlightened project of modernity and the romantic historicist nationalism. So Jews were seen as traitors. One acceleration, there were no Jews among the scientifics. Jews were the metaphor for them, right? So they were the traitor within finance, capital, and cosmopolitanism. They belonged to a cowardly and calculating group. They didn't belong to liberals, neither conservatives. They have no loyalties, selfishness, materialist, powerful. They domain the main economic resources. They have a metallized conscience. They are not national. These are the political actors that will lead the project of the Mexican Revolution before and after. And to bring an example, I will quote this idea of Luis Cabrera, right? The Mexican científico is the primordial type of the Jew. In this country, there has never been a worse social plague than the científico community. This is the object of their critique, the científico, but the resource is the Jews. The very nature of the científicos has been metallized, turned to money, just like the conscience of the Jew. If we speak either of raw material or for commercial transactions, all that was taking place in this moment in Mexico, they are similar to the Jew, who is a descendant of the Jew. It's just the same, just referring to the possibility of people that were here during escaping the Spain during the Inquisition. And what you see, no loyalty, selfish, materialist. So here we do face really a very, I would say, special moment to see how myth, how negative perceptions are transmitted, are built. And the situation here was not like during the during the Dreyfus affair, the problem of transiting to a new Germany, France, to a new moment of capitalism towards imperialism. But here we see the United States ascending as the hegemon. And more, I will go and I will see snapshots of crucial processes, right? The 20s and the 40s that I refer as between acceptance and rejections. And the otherness of Jew, the way it was built as the other, was socially represented as the foreigner. And migration became a prominent sphere in which different concepts of the nation and the desired type of society and anti-Semitic expression were articulated. They crossed governmental policies. They brought right nationalism and the deep bifurcation of nationalism, right? They brought the participation and thought of intellectuals. They crossed different contexts and configurations. We are talking about the way, in this case, nationalism fueled anti-Semitism. And here we have an example I brought to you where convergences came while building the Tropos. I cannot omit to say that these respond to this is Mexico, I'll go now to Argentina, is a very special moment. It's the 30s and 40s, where we see a socialist government, a progressive socialist government, that of General Cárdenas. We see also anti-Semitic, specific anti-Semitic organization developing under the influence of fascism and Nazism in Europe. We see anti-Semitic association of diverse types and intellectuals coming from the right. But we see also the government, and this I extend both to the initial period of immigration, but also to the end of the 30s and early 40s, when the exile of Jews from Europe was the only source of survival, the rescue moment. So what we see here, my sources, just to clarify, are the official documents of the different reference bodies that I analyze. It is the press. It is also the inner debates between the groups. And here what we see is this I brought from the different expression. And it's not to surprise that the transnational dimension that was already developing and happened at the main gatherings, international gatherings, where the Jewish question was analyzed, be it Evian or be it the other conferences, there was a sort of chain transmission, right? So here we see that representative of Mexico were saying that before, when it was discussed here, the first immigrations, and later toward the end of the 20s, when the defense of the local native national people, meaning by that non-Jews, mainly meaning by that non-Jews, people that were inhabiting here that were non-Jews. So it's against the national economic interest. There is a distinct racial character. They are subversive. I mean, they are seen as a surplus population. This is exactly the way the representative of Mexico wrote to the foreign minister from Evian, right? And of course, when we approach the anti-Semitic association, and also the more violent, like the anti-Semitic Acción Revolucionaria Mexicana, we see the increased use of these stereotypes: money grabbers, money lovers, destroyer of commerce, agents of modernity, agents of capitalism for the right intellectuals, right? Now, if we go and we see, well, you know that all Latin America was interconnected during this time through different, I recently finished a research precisely on separate and interconnected history during the Holocaust. Now, if I turn to Argentina, there we'll see what I'm very interested in underscore, that is, even though in the context of liberalism, there was this vision of Hispanism and Catholicism as a key to define the Argentine nation, and also developed the concept of global Jewish conspiracy. That's very important to say, because conspiracy theories are built in such a way that they are a source of belief and of mobilization. This is the way they are built. And in this, we see in the South, I refer now to Argentina, but also in Chile with the Mapuches came. As recently we had Luis Roniger presenting in our series, that was fascinating to see precisely how we cross from Argentina to Mexico, right? And we see the concept of conspiracy in Perón. We see it as Judeo-Bolshevism, but also agents of capitalism. The impact here in Mexico in groups like the Tecos, or groups that enter universities. And for many of these postures, anti-Semitism was the articulator. This I built in Argentina just to underscore, well, the ethnic limitation for Jews who sought asylum, despite that Argentina was a land of immigrants, right? But we see that starts to emerge the denial of the Holocaust, one of the pillars of the transformation of these tropos, right? We see prior ideas, right? They call to real physical violence, but let me just center in the middle. There is a Jewish communist conspiracy. There is here first emerges the idea of double loyalty. That means servers of Israel. I included the 60s because it is when is the Eichmann affair, and here appears for the first time with all its weight the anti-Zionism. I mean the critique of a double loyalty that affects their being seen as true national members of society. And I say this because then if we move to the 70s, 75, after the 67 war, the 6-day war, and I start to connect, I can't explain otherwise what I see as my problematic if I don't connect Jews, Israel, and Zionism, because they are connected in the argument that redefine the perception. Excuse me, I'll have some water. So here, what I refer is that the case in Mexico in 75 was very important because here was the epicenter of several international gatherings that were promoting the idea of bringing the fight against Israel and Zionism as part of the fight against imperialism and the construction of a third world autonomous perspective. So here, I brought together 75, but also the way a prejudice can overcome its concrete political conjuncture, its concrete political configuration, and continue to influence until, of course, the Gulf War, right? And we start to see how it came. The particular was that Mexico experienced the negative vote, the positive vote of Zionism equating racism, then the effort, then the boycott that came to Mexico, and then the effort to overcome and resolve the situation that finally brought to the resignation of the foreign minister. So what we see, if I go to the exchange of letters, to the documents and declaration, is the recovery of old myths that bring us to what I said, the incorporation of new referents, Zionism, Israel, the Jews, the local Jews, and again, to the right, to the lower part, the perpetrator of a Nazi Holocaust. That means it, for the first time, not the first time, it's not a good way to express myself. It enters the already elaboration of the victim that became the victimizer. So here, what we have is the accusation that Israel plays the role of victimhood, that they are perpetrator of the Nazi Holocaust. This argument certainly will increase after the aftermath of the Oslo peace agreement, when they failed, when there was no peace negotiation, and of course, the accusation and the similitude that was brought between political, military occupation and genocide increased in very serious way. So let me try to advance with probably with this last slide, and then come back to me to present to you one step further. So I don't think, and that's very important to say, that anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and anti-Israelism are the same. They are singular, they are different, but they are overlapping at the meaning-making level, as we recently saw in the previous, right? This is very important to see how arguments, as all ideologies and beliefs, are relational, and they were built. So the motivation may differ in all the cases, right? Maybe prejudices, cultural configuration, social interest, changing political constellation, the Arab world, the Serb world, the Soviet Union, and thereafter the former Soviet Union, geostrategic interest, the changing rivalries in the Middle East, all these exist. And then we have also different perspective, right? Who are the political actors that are playing at that moment? What are the conditions of integration, participation, and legitimate status of the communities in the different places? And when I say anti-Israelism, I don't mean the critique of the government of Netanyahu or whoever you want. I mean the critique of the state, which is completely different from a critique of the policies. I mean the illegitimate condition of the state. But the possible outcomes, now we can see, all of us, that are different in Latin America, that they are different in Europe, that they are different in North America, but there are several common, I would say, elements. What is the normalization of the hostility toward the Jew through the critique of Israel. The radicalization of the discourse, which is increasingly interacting with the, I would say, the transnationalization of the prejudice. They are new threshold of acceptance of rejection to, for example, towards the denial of the Holocaust, or the denial of the right of the Jews to have a state if they didn't have a state and they were mining the basis of the state, as we saw with the discussion in Europe. Here it is quite related to the idea of the state of Israel as an artificial creation. And of course, the violence, symbolic or physical, is different. If you just read today the newspaper, you'll see, for example, that there were graffitis and destructions in Hungary and in Germany, and there were graffitis and painting in Argentina, but there is a different degree, if you may say, of violence. So this brings me, if you're, well, this is what I said, right? And now let me just come back to you in the full screen and tell you that what I find here problematic is the way that intersectional approaches, when related with colonial and post-colonial and decolonial theories, become really a very problematic situation for us in the academy, outside the academy. And it has to do mainly, I would say, with this conception that I already presented through the initial references, that there is now defined a global South that is a space of liberation from the West. That the expansion of the West brought us to a periphery condition, in the world system. But what I want mainly to underscore is the idea that following this matrix of colonialism, which is knowledge is equivalent to power, the Jew becomes whitened, he's racialized, I mean, his race is taken away from him, not the race, the idea of belonging to some other condition and not completely the powerful white. Then, of course, at the level of the vision or prejudice of economy, the Jew as a rich Jew, as a capitalist Jew, the capitalist West, the imperial Jew. This brings us to elaborations very problematic with some of the authors that were mainly post-Zionist that focused their critique on the policy of occupation of Israel, and then they brought the idea of the Constantine Jew, right? Like in the Roman Empire, the Catholic, right, hegemony. So here, if I want to be clear, and I want you to follow, what happens mainly is that the whitening of the Jew, seeing Israel of a complicity with the West, seeing mainly the other inhabitants of the region as non-white and excluded, and the Holocaust as a Western Eurocentric way of building memory and thus erasing its own responsibility for other genocides, bring us to very difficult moments that it is our duty, that's my opinion, and with this I want to finish, it's our duty to open a dialogue, to open the debate, to reflect about the common and the singular that will bring us to I would say, a more fruitful approach to our subject. So here I will stop. I regret that I extended much more of the assigned allocated time, but here I am, Professor Patterson. I don't know what's the next moment.
Thank you.
Session.
Thank you for a wonderful and deeply insightful presentation. And I'm amazed at how brilliantly you make these intricate interconnections. It sheds a lot of light on this. Are there any questions? I keep checking the chat for questions. I have a few.
Okay, I will be glad to hold a conversation with you, especially regarding the paradigm of the Holocaust, right? And the inversion of the argument. But I'm ready to listen to you now, please.
Well, I think part of the inversion that you describe by not just calling the Jews Nazis, Israelis are Nazis, but actually arguing that the Jews were behind it. They're the ones who perpetrated the Holocaust. I think this is an instance of what characterizes the anti-Semitic view of the Jew, namely that the Jew, it's not that all Jews are evil, but that all evil is Jewish. So if you want to purify the world, if you want a pure religion, a pure ideology, a pure utopian dream, you have to eliminate the contagion of the Jew. So it's not an accident that the Jews are blamed for the coronavirus, right? I mean, that's in keeping with Jew as impure, alien presence, foreign presence. And I think this is, as you point out, as you mentioned, this comes from, in my view, from all of the political spectrum. I mean, being on the left or the right doesn't mean you're free of being an anti-Semite. The whitening of the Jew comes largely from the left, right? Certainly in academia, the anti-Zionism comes largely in academia. I'm talking about professors and students on campuses, is largely from the left. And as you also touched on, it has become not only fashionable and acceptable, but I think in some ways morally required. In many circles where I live in academia, you cannot be viewed as a good person unless you oppose the existence of the Jewish state. So those, just a few thoughts. I'd like to know what you think.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. In fact, I would really look forward to a conversation, because it's exactly what we have to face now. Imagine that I am in Mexico at the National University. I'm heading the Journal of Political and Social Sciences. I have in the past devoted several dossiers of the journal to Holocaust compared and differing from genocide. I have devoted also to other subjects that are like this, and I live in a context that it's very difficult, because post-colonialism and decolonialism became today really a hegemonic current, and it has combined with intersectionality, which is well accepted, with elements of the global South that point to the origin of the conquest in America, right, in Latin America, and the colonial presence, and plus all that with post-Zionism like Ilan Pape or others that were invited here. And you know, it is very, very conflicted, because the political critique triggers an immense amount of elements that simply belong to an anti-Semitic mind.
Yes.
If the current colleague that is in charge of the chair that Edward Said was in the States, in NYU, in Columbia, sorry, right? And he talks about a moral deficit, then we are really facing, but let me add another point, probably. Paralleling this hegemonic discourse in the academia, the internet, all the anonymity, all the interconnection of different groups, all the expression of intolerance, all the creation of this community of sense, of meaning that crosses countries, etc., bring us also to very primitive expressions of anti-Jewish prejudices. So I agree with you. I agree completely with you. It's not only that they are perpetrating, but they were behind. Yes, of course. Look, I listened last week an interview with a colleague of us. I will omit now the name. He's in Jerusalem. He's a very distinguished professor, that he started to talk about the need to revise and research what is the connection between anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. Well, all this is the new generation that came after Yaakov Katz, From Prejudice to Destruction. You see, so that's what we face. So
yes, there's so much to talk about.
We'll do it.
I only have about 2 minutes left. You made such excellent points that one very good point you made is the ways in which anti-Semitism is subsumed under racism in general. That is an anti-Semitic move in itself, I think. And sometimes, as I've said, anti-Semitism is not a form of racism. Racism is a form of anti-Semitism. In other words, and this goes to taking Judaism, the religion, out of it. The religion that teaches that every human being is a ben Adam, is a child of Adam, a child of God. So you have to oppose that view of what constitutes the holiness of a human being in order to arrive at a racist outlook. So you touched on so many things that run so deep. It was just a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm going to have to wind it down. I look forward, Judit, to conversations in the future.
Yes, of course, of course. Thank you very much. I much appreciate your presence and the audience. And I hope this recorded session will be distributed and will be able to have more participants in this conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I'll certainly refer my students to this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.